No! Step away from the door! Keep your hands up where I can see them!
My residence. Identify yourself and state your authority.
You can explain that downtown. Turn around, right now!
I am a... You are making a serious...
I don't care what you say you are! You're being...
At 6:47 a.m. on a quiet Saturday morning in Pasadena, California, a black woman in a bathrobe stepped out of her front door to retrieve the newspaper from the end of her driveway. Birds were singing, coffee was brewing inside, 2 grandchildren were still asleep in the guest room down the hall. The street was lined with mature oaks and well-kept homes, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. The woman was Justice Vivian Ashford, 58 years old, Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. She had spent more than 30 years in law. She had served as a federal prosecutor, then as an appellate judge, before being appointed to the state's highest court 6 years earlier. Legal scholars called her one of the sharpest minds on the bench. She had written landmark opinions on civil liberties, police accountability, and constitutional protections that were cited in law schools across the country. That morning, none of that mattered to the men inside the black SUV rolling slowly down Mariposa Lane. All they saw was a black woman standing alone in a driveway, and that was enough. The man behind the wheel of that SUV was ICE Supervisory Agent Dalton Voss, 44 years old, 16 years with the agency. Voss was known internally for what supervisors politely called high-yield operations. In practice, that meant aggressive tactics, maximum arrests, and minimal paperwork. He ran his team like every sweep was a raid, every target a threat, every door an obstacle. 9 formal complaints had been filed against him by civil rights attorneys over the years. Every single one had been buried or dismissed. Sitting beside him was Agent Nolan Strack, 31, 4 years on the job, the kind of junior agent who never questioned a senior officer's call. Strack followed Voss the way a shadow follows a body. He laughed when Voss laughed. He moved when Voss moved. And when Voss made a decision, Strack backed it without hesitation. That morning, the two of them were running a targeted immigration sweep in the Pasadena area based on a tip about undocumented individuals somewhere in the neighborhood. Their warrant named a specific address, 412 Mariposa Lane. Justice Vivian Ashford lived at 414 Mariposa Lane, 1 house over, 2 digits apart, but Voss never double-checked. He didn't verify the house number, he didn't confirm the name on the mailbox, he didn't cross-reference the address on the warrant with the property in front of him. He saw a black woman in a driveway, and his assumptions did the rest. He put the SUV in park, opened his door, and stepped onto the curb with the confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for being wrong. Voss stepped out of the SUV first. Strack followed half a second later. 2 additional agents climbed out from the back seats, both in tactical vests with ICE printed across the chest. 4 federal agents, armed and deliberate, walking up the driveway of a 58-year-old woman in a bathrobe holding a Saturday newspaper. Voss led the approach. His hand rested on his belt. His posture was wide, aggressive, the stance of a man who had already decided how this was going to go before a single word was spoken. He stopped 5 feet from Ashford and didn't introduce himself, didn't show credentials, didn't explain why 4 armed men were standing on her property before 7 in the morning. He started with a command. "I need to see identification. Who are you? Who else is inside this residence? Are you a United States citizen?" Ashford looked at the 4 men, then back at Voss. Her voice was steady. "My name is Vivian Ashford. I am an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. This is my home." Voss tilted his head slightly and let out a short laugh. "Sure you are." He glanced at Strack. "People say all kinds of things." Strack moved without being told, stepping to the side and positioning himself between Ashford and her front door. She noticed it immediately. She had spent 3 decades in courtrooms reading body language, watching how power was used and misused. She knew what a blocked exit meant. "Do you have a warrant for this address?" she asked. Voss ignored the question entirely. "Put your hands where I can see them." She was standing in her own driveway, in her bathrobe, holding a newspaper. And a federal agent was telling her to show her hands as if she were a suspect in a crime that didn't exist. Ashford spoke again, slower this time. each word delivered with the precision of someone who had spent a career choosing language carefully. I am Justice Vivian Ashford of the California Supreme Court. I am asking you again, do you have a warrant for this address? Voss stepped closer. That mouth is going to get you in trouble. His right hand shot out and grabbed her arm just above the elbow. He spun her around hard enough that her slippers scraped across the concrete. The newspaper slipped from her fingers and landed flat on the driveway. Her reading glasses, knocked loose from the force of the turn, hit the pavement and cracked. Strack moved in immediately, taking her other arm and pulling it behind her back. Ashford's voice stayed controlled even as her body was being forced into position. You are making a grave mistake. I am not resisting. Voss didn't respond. He pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt and locked them around her wrists. The metallic click echoed in the early morning silence. A sitting justice of the California Supreme Court was now in handcuffs in her own driveway, detained by federal agents who had no warrant for her address, no probable cause, and no legal basis to touch her. Across the street, Edwin Choi, 72, a retired aerospace engineer, had been watering his garden when the SUV pulled up. He watched the entire approach. When the handcuffs came out, he set down his hose, pulled his phone from his shirt pocket, and began recording. 2 doors down, Sandra Oyeleran, 45, a professor of applied physics at Caltech, stepped outside when she heard the raised voices. She saw Ashford in cuffs and shouted across the lawn. "What are you doing? Stop! Leave her alone!" Strack turned toward her. "Ma'am, go back inside your home, or you will be detained." Oyeleran didn't move. Her phone was already in her hand. Inside the house, the shouting reached the guest room at the end of the hall. Elijah, 10, woke first. He sat up in bed and listened. The voices were sharp, male, commanding. They didn't belong to anyone he knew. He slid out of bed and walked to the front window of the living room. What he saw through the glass would stay with him for the rest of his life. His grandmother was standing in the driveway in her bathrobe, her arms behind her back, metal cuffs around her wrists. 4 men in tactical vests with guns on their hips surrounded her. One of them had his hand on her shoulder. Elijah screamed. The sound woke Simone, 7, who came running down the hallway calling for her grandmother. When she reached the living room and saw her brother pressed against the window, shaking, she began to cry. Neither child understood what was happening. Neither child had been told. Before either of them could reach the front door, it opened from the outside. A third agent, one of the 2 who had exited the back of the SUV, stepped into the home without knocking, without permission, and without a warrant. He saw the 2 children standing in the living room, one screaming, one sobbing. He reached for his radio. "There are kids in here." Voss's voice came back through the speaker, flat and unbothered. "Secure them." The agent looked at Elijah and Simone. "Sit down on the couch. Don't move." Simone's voice broke through her tears. "Where's my grandma? What are you doing to my grandma?" The agent said nothing. He stood near the door with his arms crossed and offered no comfort, no explanation, no reassurance. 2 children, 10 and 7, held in place on their grandmother's couch by an armed federal agent who had entered the home without legal authority. That detail, when it became public, would become the single most explosive element of the entire case, and it was already being recorded. Across the street, Edwin Choi held his phone steady with both hands. The camera captured everything: Ashford in cuffs, her calm, measured protests, Voss standing over her with his chest out and his jaw set, Strack positioned between her and the front door like a wall, the cracked reading glasses on the pavement, the newspaper lying where it had fallen. Every frame was sharp, every word was audible. 2 doors down, Sandra Oyeleran recorded from her front yard at a different angle. Her hands were shaking visibly, not from fear but from anger. Her footage caught what Choi's couldn't: the moment the third agent pushed open the front door and disappeared inside the house without anyone inviting him in. Choi lowered his phone just long enough to dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, he spoke quickly. "Federal agents are outside my neighbor's house. They've handcuffed her in her driveway." "She's a justice of the California Supreme Court." There was a pause on the line. Sir, can you repeat that? He said it again, slower. They have her in handcuffs. She's a sitting justice. They're in her house now. There are children inside. The dispatcher flagged the call as priority. Oyelaran didn't wait for 911. She called the Pasadena Police Department directly. Her voice was tight, controlled, furious. She gave the address, described what she was seeing, and demanded officers respond immediately. A jogger who had been running up Mariposa Lane slowed, then stopped completely when he saw the scene. He pulled out his phone and began filming from the sidewalk. No one told him to leave. No one noticed him at all. Within 20 minutes of Voss stepping out of that SUV, 3 independent recordings existed from 3 different angles. None of them showed a crime being committed by Vivian Ashford. All of them showed crimes being committed against her. The Pasadena PD cruiser came around the corner of Mariposa Lane 7 minutes after the 911 call. 2 officers stepped out. The first was Sergeant Diana Reeves, 46, a 19-year veteran of the department with a reputation for being calm under pressure and intolerant of nonsense. Her partner stayed near the vehicle. Reeves took in the scene in 3 seconds. A black woman in a bathrobe, handcuffed in a driveway, 4 men in tactical vests with ice markings, neighbors on porches with phones raised, cracked glasses on the ground, a newspaper lying in the middle of the concrete. She walked straight to Voss. "What's going on here?" Voss didn't look at her when he answered. "Immigration enforcement operation. Federal matter. Local PD can stand down." Reeves didn't move. "I'm not standing down." I responded to a 911 call reporting a unlawful detention. "Show me the warrant." Voss exhaled through his nose, annoyed, but reached into his vest and produced the folded document. He handed it over like it proved something. Reeves opened it. Her eyes moved to the address line. 2412 Mariposa Lane. She looked up. Then she looked at the house. At the numbers beside the front door, 414. She folded the warrant and handed it back. "You're at the wrong house." Voss blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Strack, standing 2 steps behind him, went pale. Reeves continued, "And this woman is Justice Vivian Ashford of the California Supreme Court. Remove the handcuffs." Now, Voss didn't move. "We're still verifying the situation." "There's nothing to verify," Reeves said. "You're at the wrong address. Your warrant doesn't apply here. Take the cuffs off." Voss shifted his weight. His jaw tightened. He looked at Strack, then back at Reeves. "I need to confirm with my Sergeant." Reeves raised her voice. She didn't shout, but every person on that street heard her clearly. "I said remove the handcuffs. Now." Across the street, Edwin Choi's phone captured every second. The hesitation, the defiance. The moment a local sergeant had to tell a federal agent twice to stop breaking the law. The standoff lasted several more minutes. Voss stood with his feet planted, jaw locked, the posture of a man trying to find a way to maintain authority he had already lost. Reeves didn't repeat herself a third time. She simply stood between Voss and Ashford with her Bodycam running and waited. It was Strack who finally moved. He stepped forward, reached for the cuffs, and looked at Voss. Voss gave a barely perceptible nod, the kind of gesture a man makes when he wants to pretend the decision was still his. The cuffs came off. Ashford brought her wrists forward slowly. The skin was red, pressed with the pattern of the metal. Her robe had twisted and pulled loose during the struggle. Her reading glasses lay cracked on the pavement beside the newspaper she had come outside to collect what now felt like a lifetime ago. She was trembling, not from fear. Vivian Ashford had faced down hostile courtrooms, argued before federal panels, and written opinions that changed the legal landscape of an entire state. She was trembling from fury, the kind that doesn't explode but calculates. She turned to Voss and looked directly into his face. "You entered my property without a warrant. You put your hands on me without cause. You sent an agent into my home where my grandchildren were sleeping. I want your full names. I want your badge numbers. I want your supervisor's name and contact information. Every single word of what just happened is going to matter." Voss's tone shifted, smaller now. "Ma'am, it was a mistake. We had the wrong address. Ashford didn't blink. A mistake is knocking on the wrong door. What you did was assault. Reeves stepped to the side, keyed her radio, and spoke clearly. Captain, this is Reeves on Mariposa Lane. We have a major incident. Federal agents detained a sitting California Supreme Court justice at her home without a warrant. Children were involved. I need command staff here immediately. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice came back. Repeat that. Reeves repeated it, word for word. The silence that followed said everything. Within the hour, the phone calls began. They started local and climbed fast. Sergeant Reeves's captain arrived on scene, took one look at the situation, and called the Pasadena city attorney from his car. The city attorney listened for less than a minute before calling the California Attorney General's office. That call was answered immediately. Inside the house, Vivian Ashford sat at her kitchen table. Her grandchildren were in the next room with a neighbor who had come over to sit with them. Simone had stopped crying but wouldn't let go of her brother's hand. Elijah hadn't spoken a word since the agents left the front porch. Ashford was still in her bathrobe. Her wrists still carried the red impressions of the cuffs. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. She picked up the phone and called the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. She gave a precise, factual account. No emotion, no editorializing, just the facts. Federal agents arrived at my home at approximately 6:50 a.m. They had a warrant for a different address. They handcuffed me in my driveway. They entered my home without permission. My grandchildren were inside. They were held by an armed agent without explanation. The Chief Justice listened without interrupting. When Ashford finished, the Chief Justice made one call to the governor's office. The governor's office made one call to the United States Department of Justice. By mid-morning, the incident on Mariposa Lane had reached Washington. Separately, Sandra O'Yelaran sat on her front steps with her phone in her hand. She trimmed her video down to 90 seconds, the most damning 90 seconds, and posted it to social media with a caption that read, "ICE agents just handcuffed a California Supreme Court justice in her driveway in her bathrobe, in front of her grandchildren. They had the wrong house." Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed over 1 million times, and it was still climbing. By that afternoon, the DHS Office of Inspector General had opened a formal investigation. ICE headquarters in Washington was blindsided. No one at the agency's national level had authorized or been made aware of a high-profile enforcement operation at a judicial officer's residence. Voss's operational paperwork was pulled within hours. The warrant was reviewed line by line. The target address was 412 Mariposa Lane. Ashford's home was 414. The file contained no pre-operation verification of the target address, no confirmation that the location matched the warrant, no cross-referencing of neighboring properties, no awareness whatsoever that a sitting justice of the California Supreme Court lived one house over from the intended target. Internal reviewers also discovered that Voss's team had conducted no surveillance before the operation, no drive-by, no advanced scout, no visual confirmation. Pre-operation surveillance was standard protocol for residential enforcement actions, a basic safeguard designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic error. Voss had skipped it entirely. His file showed a pattern of shortcuts, operations launched on incomplete intelligence, addresses verified after the fact rather than before, paperwork filed retroactively. A senior DHS official convened a closed-door briefing later that day. According to two people present, the official stood at the head of the table, looked around the room, and said, "This is the worst operational failure I have seen in 20 years." They handcuffed a sitting justice, on camera, with children in the house. No one in the room responded. There was nothing to say. The footage was already everywhere. The phone calls had already reached the highest levels of government. And the machinery of accountability, slow as it often was, had already begun to move in a direction that Dalton Voss and Nolan Strack could not outrun. The investigators moved fast. Within 48 hours of the incident, every piece of available evidence had been collected, cataloged, and placed under federal review. Body camera footage was the first priority. Voss's camera had not been activated. He claimed later it was an oversight, that the device had malfunctioned, that he hadn't realized it wasn't recording. Investigators noted that this was the fourth time in 3 years Voss had failed to activate his body camera during a field operation that resulted in a complaint. The pattern was not lost on anyone reviewing the file, but Strack's camera had been running. From the moment he stepped out of the SUV to the moment Sergeant Reeves ordered the cuffs removed, his body cam captured everything. The footage confirmed every detail. Ashford's calm, measured identification of herself, Voss's dismissive laugh, the words, "Sure you are," spoken with a tone that no amount of context could soften. Strack blocking the path to the front door, Voss grabbing her arm, the newspaper falling, the glasses cracking on the pavement, the handcuffs locking into place, and inside the house, picked up through the open front door, the sound of children screaming. Investigators also pulled Edwin Choi's cell phone video, Sandra Oyelaran's recording from her front yard, the jogger's footage from the sidewalk, Sergeant Reeves's body cam, the 911 audio, dispatch logs, and every operational planning document associated with that morning's sweep. Each source told the same story from a different angle. None of them contradicted each other. All of them pointed in the same direction. Internal Affairs then pulled Voss's personnel file. 9 formal complaints from civil rights attorneys spanning more than a decade. 2 of those complaints specifically alleged racial profiling during immigration enforcement sweeps. Both had been dismissed without a full investigation. 3 others cited excessive force during residential operations. All closed with findings of insufficient evidence. The pattern didn't emerge slowly. It was already there, fully formed, waiting for someone to finally look at it. The story broke nationally on a Monday morning. By Tuesday, it was everywhere. Every major network ran the footage. Cable news played it on a loop. The cell phone videos from Choi and Oyelaran were embedded in every online article, shared millions of times, commented on in dozens of languages. Legal commentators used words that rarely appeared in cable news segments. Unprecedented violation of judicial independence, constitutional crisis at the doorstep, assault on the separation of powers. One former federal judge, speaking on a morning broadcast, said plainly that in 40 years of practice, he had never seen a sitting member of a state's highest court handcuffed by federal agents on her own property without a warrant. The California State Bar issued a formal statement condemning the incident and calling for a full federal investigation. The NAACP demanded immediate accountability and structural reform within ICE. Civil liberties organizations filed amicus briefs in support of any future legal action before a case had even been announced. A press conference was held midweek. Civil rights attorneys stood behind a podium with Ashford's permission and displayed 2 photographs. The first showed her wrists, bruised and marked where the handcuffs had pressed into her skin. The second showed her reading glasses, cracked and lying on the driveway concrete. The images were published on the front page of 4 national newspapers, but it was a quote from a 10-year-old boy that cut through everything else. In a newspaper interview conducted with his mother's consent, Elijah sat in his grandmother's living room and said 7 words that became the defining line of the national conversation. "I saw my grandma in handcuffs. I thought they were going to take her away." That quote was reprinted in editorials, cited in congressional floor speeches, and shared so widely online that it became impossible to discuss the case without hearing it. Protests formed outside the ICE field office in Los Angeles. They were calm, organized, and persistent. Elected officials at every level, city council members, state legislators, members of Congress, issued public statements demanding answers. And in Pasadena, on a quiet street where the house numbers 412 and 414 sat side by side, the answers were already taking shape in the form of evidence that no statement, no press briefing, and no internal review could make disappear. The terminations came down 5 weeks after the incident. There was no quiet reassignment, no administrative leave stretched into silence, no resignation accepted in lieu of discipline. The findings were made public and the language was unsparing. Supervisory Agent Dalton Voss was terminated for gross misconduct, operational negligence, excessive use of force, failure to verify a warrant address prior to execution, unauthorized entry into a private residence, failure to activate a body camera during a field operation, and conduct unbecoming a federal agent. His federal law enforcement credentials were revoked. He was barred from future employment with any federal agency. 16 years with ICE, 9 buried complaints, and a career built on shortcuts and aggression ended in a single memorandum of termination that would follow his name for the rest of his life. Agent Nolan Strack was fired for failure to intervene during an unlawful detention, active participation in the warrantless restraint of a civilian, and enabling the unauthorized entry into a private home where minor children were present. His credentials were suspended pending further review, a formality that effectively guaranteed he would never work in federal law enforcement again. 4 years of following without questioning. 4 years of backing every call, laughing at every joke, never once saying, "Stop." That silence now carried a price. The 2 additional agents who had been on scene received formal reprimands and multi-week suspensions without pay. One of them, the agent who had entered the home and stood over 2 terrified children without offering a word of explanation, was reassigned to a desk position indefinitely. Voss's former supervisor, the man who had reviewed and dismissed 9 complaints over more than a decade, was placed under internal review. The review found a pattern of deliberate inaction, complaints from civil rights attorneys filed and never followed up, red flags documented and never escalated. He was given 2 options: early retirement or formal proceedings. He chose retirement. ICE's regional field office director, who had overseen the unit responsible for that morning's sweep, was reassigned to a non-operational role in Washington. A federal consent decree was imposed on the regional office requiring sweeping reforms: mandatory pre-operation address verification with independent sign-off, body camera activation required for all field operations with automatic disciplinary triggers for non-compliance, a civilian oversight panel with authority to review operational planning and complaint disposition. The decree would remain in effect for 5 years, monitored by a federal judge. The machinery that had protected Dalton Voss for 16 years had finally been forced to dismantle the system it had built around him. 8 weeks after the terminations, Justice Vivian Ashford filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Central District of California. The defendants were Dalton Voss, Nolan Strack, the 2 additional agents, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint was 47 pages long. It alleged unlawful detention in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments, excessive force against a compliant, unarmed civilian, warrantless entry into a private residence, unlawful seizure of a person without probable cause, racial profiling as a motivating factor in the agent's decision-making, intentional infliction of emotional distress upon both the justice and her 2 minor grandchildren, and a claim that appeared in no standard civil rights template, violation of judicial independence through the physical detention and restraint of a sitting member of a state's highest court by agents of the federal executive branch. The evidence attached to the complaint was overwhelming: Strack's body camera footage, 3 independent cell phone recordings, Sergeant Reeves's body cam, the 911 audio, dispatch logs, the warrant showing the wrong address, Voss's operational file showing no pre-operation verification, his personnel record showing 9 dismissed complaints, photographs of Ashford's bruised wrists, photographs of her cracked glasses on the pavement, a written statement from the agent who entered the home confirming that he encountered 2 minor children inside and was instructed by Voss to secure them, medical records documenting the children's subsequent treatment for anxiety and sleep disturbances. The government's attorneys reviewed the evidence and requested a settlement conference before the case reached discovery. The settlement was reached 4 months later. The dollar amount was historic, placing it among the largest civil rights settlements ever paid in a case involving federal immigration enforcement. But Ashford had made clear from the beginning that money alone was not the point. The settlement included structural demands that went far beyond the regional consent decree: a national review of ICE operational protocols for residential enforcement actions, mandatory address verification procedures requiring independent confirmation before any warrant execution at a private residence, a civilian complaint review process with binding authority over disposition of misconduct allegations, annual civil rights audits of enforcement teams conducted by an independent body with public reporting requirements. Legal scholars called it one of the most consequential civil rights settlements in the history of federal immigration enforcement. Law journals published analyses of the case before the ink on the agreement was dry, and Ashford, in a brief public statement released the day the settlement was finalized, announced that a portion of the funds would be donated to establish a legal defense fund for immigrant families who had been subjected to unlawful raids and had no resources to fight back. She said simply, "I had a name and a title that forced people to pay attention. Most people who experience what I experienced do not. This fund is for them." Justice Vivian Ashford returned to the bench 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized. There was no press conference. She simply walked into the courthouse on a Monday morning, put on her robe, and took her seat. She rarely spoke about the incident publicly. She declined most interview requests and turned down invitations to speak at rallies and panels. But once, in a rare sit-down with a legal journal, she said something that would be quoted more than any opinion she had ever written. "I am a justice of the highest court in this state. If they did this to me in my driveway, in my bathrobe, imagine what they do to people who have no title, no camera, no neighbor willing to record. That is why this matters." Dalton Voss left California within months of his termination. His name was permanently tied to the case. Every search returned the same footage, the same headlines. No agency would consider him. No security firm would take the risk. The career built on aggression and shortcuts was gone, replaced by a record that would define him for the rest of his life. Nolan Strack learned that silence carried its own sentence. He had not given the orders. But he had blocked her path, helped force her arms behind her back, and when the moment came to intervene, he did nothing. His career ended with the quiet, documented absence of conscience. Months later, Elijah's fifth-grade teacher assigned a personal essay. He wrote 4 pages in pencil titled "The Morning They Took My Grandma." It was published unedited by a national magazine and became one of the most widely shared pieces of the year. In Pasadena, on a quiet street where the numbers 412 and 414 sit side by side, a Supreme Court justice still retrieves her newspaper every morning. No one has come to her driveway since. This case was brutal, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Don't move! Hands up!
I'm a
Now!
federal judge. This is my home. Do you have a warrant?
Yeah? That's what they all say when they get caught somewhere they don't
I
belong.
belong here. You're on my property.
You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. Get on the ground before I put you there.
At 6:42 on a Sunday morning in Coral Springs, Florida, the street was still. Sprinklers ticked across trimmed lawns. A few porch lights glowed in the early gray. Federal Judge Nadine Ashford, 54 years old, stood beside her car in the driveway wearing a white dress and low heels, a Bible and handbag on the passenger seat, her keys in her hand. She was heading to early service the way she did most Sundays, quietly and alone. Then 3 unmarked black SUVs turned hard onto her street, engines loud enough to break the silence of the entire block. They pulled into her driveway in formation, tires barking against the pavement. 6 ICE agents stepped out in tactical vests, sidearms visible, boots heavy on the concrete. The lead agent, Brock Stanton, 43, moved toward her with one hand resting on his holster and the other pointing directly at her. "Don't move. Stay right there." Ashford froze, keys still between her fingers. Behind Stanton, 5 agents fanned out across her property like she was a target in a raid. No one announced a warrant. No one stated probable cause. No one asked a single question before giving commands. What Ashford didn't know yet was that minutes earlier, Stanton had keyed his radio and told dispatch he was approaching a residence where the occupant, quote, "doesn't match the address." That phrase, captured on the dispatch recording, would become the first piece of evidence in a federal investigation that would end careers, trigger congressional hearings, and settle for millions. But in that moment, All Nadine Ashford knew was that 6 armed men had surrounded her in her own driveway, and not one of them saw a judge. They saw a black woman who, in their eyes, didn't belong. Nadine Ashford was not a woman the system had overlooked. She was one it had elevated because she had earned every step. Born in Liberty City, Miami, one of the toughest neighborhoods in South Florida, she was raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a hospital custodian. She attended public schools where half the students didn't graduate. She did, first in her class. A full academic scholarship took her to Howard University, where she studied political science and graduated summa cum laude. Then came Yale Law School, where she was one of only a handful of black women in her class. She clerked for a federal appellate judge in the 11th Circuit, then spent over a decade as a civil rights litigator before being nominated to the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida. She was confirmed with bipartisan support 7 years before that Sunday morning. On the bench, she was known for being fair but immovable. She followed the law with precision and held every party to the same standard, including federal agencies. In multiple immigration cases, she had ruled against ICE for due process violations, sloppy filings, and unlawful detentions. Her opinions were cited in appellate decisions. Her name carried weight inside the Department of Justice. She had lived in the same Coral Springs home for 9 years. Her neighbors knew her by name. Her mail carrier waved every afternoon. Her lawn was maintained, her taxes paid, her life built with discipline and intention. None of that mattered to Brock Stanton. He didn't run her name. He didn't check the deed. He saw a black woman in a neighborhood that didn't fit his assumptions, and that was enough. Brock Stanton had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 17 years, all of them stationed out of the Miami field office. He had built a career not on precision or professionalism, but on volume. High numbers, fast operations, minimal paperwork. Among colleagues, he was known as a cowboy, the kind of agent who moved first and justified later. He ran his unit like a patrol squad with no leash, targeting neighborhoods based on instinct rather than intelligence, stopping people based on appearance rather than evidence. His file told a story his supervisors had chosen not to read: 11 formal complaints from detainees and residents over the past decade, allegations of racial profiling, verbal abuse during stops, fabricated justifications entered into reports after the fact to cover baseless detentions. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally and dismissed, not investigated thoroughly, not referred to the Inspector General, dismissed. His supervisor, Deputy Field Director Vance Kellner, 51, had shielded Stanton for years. Kellner liked results. He liked agents who didn't hesitate, and Stanton delivered numbers that made the office look productive, even if the methods behind those numbers would never survive outside scrutiny. Kellner signed off on Stanton's reports without question, approved his operations without oversight, and praised him in performance reviews as, quote, one of our most effective field leaders. Among immigration attorneys and advocacy organizations in South Florida, Stanton's unit had earned a different kind of reputation. They called them the hunting party, not because of what they found, but because of how they operated, moving through affluent zip codes, stopping people who looked out of place to them, and building cases backward from assumptions rather than forward from facts. That was the man now standing in Nadine Ashford's driveway, hand on his weapon, voice raised, giving orders to a woman he hadn't bothered to identify. Stanton's first words were not a question. They were a command. Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands where I can see them. Ashford set her keys on the roof of her car, slowly, keeping her movements visible. She had spent decades in courtrooms watching defendants' rights get trampled by exactly this kind of approach. She knew what was happening. I'm a federal judge, she said, her voice calm and deliberate. This is my home. I'd like to see a warrant. Stanton didn't reach for paperwork. He laughed, a short, dismissive exhale through his nose that the dispatch audio would later confirm. Behind her, Agent Luke Driscoll, 36, 6 years with ICE, positioned himself between Ashford and her front door. He didn't announce himself. He didn't explain. He simply stood there, arms crossed, blocking her path back into her own house. To her left, Agent Tara Nolan, 31, held a department-issued recording device at chest height. The red light was on, but the angle was wrong. Nolan kept the lens tilted slightly downward, capturing boots and pavement rather than faces and hands. It would later be proven in the federal investigation that Nolan adjusted the camera's angle 3 separate times during the encounter, each time away from the moments of greatest force. Ashford asked again, "Do you have a warrant?" Stanton stepped closer. "Ma'am, warrants aren't your concern right now. What you need to do is cooperate, or this gets worse for you." She asked a third time, slower, louder, voice steady enough for anyone within earshot to hear. "I am asking you for the third time. Do you have a warrant to be on my property?" Stanton said nothing. Across the street, a door opened. Colonel Edwin Osei, 67, retired United States Marine Corps, stepped onto his front porch in a bathrobe, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He had watched the SUVs arrive, he had seen the agents fan out, and now he saw his neighbor, a woman he had known for nearly a decade, standing surrounded in her own driveway with no explanation and no warrant. Osei raised his phone and pressed record. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The camera was steady, the angle was wide, and it captured everything Nolan's device was carefully avoiding. For several seconds, no one moved. Ashford stood with her hands visible, her posture still, her voice the only thing she offered. She had complied with every instruction. She had not raised her voice. She had not stepped toward any agent. She had answered clearly and identified herself 3 times. None of it mattered. Stanton's patience, what little he had carried into the driveway, was gone. He tilted his head slightly toward Driscoll, then looked back at Ashford. "You're being evasive. Get on the ground. Now." Ashford's voice didn't waver. "I am a sitting federal judge of the United States District Court. This is my home. You have no warrant. This is an unlawful detention." Stanton moved before she finished the sentence. His left hand clamped around her right wrist. He twisted her arm behind her back with a sharp upward pull that made her gasp. Her heels slipped on the concrete. Her knees hit the driveway first, then her shoulder, then her forehead. The sound was hard and immediate, skin and bone against rough pavement. The white dress she had pressed for church tore at the knee. A line of blood appeared above her left eye where her brow had struck the ground. Driscoll was on her within seconds, pinning her left arm flat, while Stanton wrenched the right one higher and snapped cuffs over both wrists. Nolan stood 6 feet away, department camera still running, still angled low, still capturing nothing that mattered. She did not speak. She did not intervene. She did not move. Then the front door opened. Elijah, 14, Ashford's grandson, stood in the doorway barefoot, wearing pajamas. He saw his grandmother face down on the concrete, blood running down her temple, 2 men kneeling on her back, her church dress stained and torn. He screamed, not words, just sound. The kind of sound a child makes when the world stops making sense. Stanton's head snapped toward the door. He pointed one finger directly at the boy. "Get back inside or you're next." Elijah stumbled backward into the house. The door stayed open. From across the street, every frame of it was being recorded. Colonel Edwin Osei had not moved from his porch. His phone was steady, in his right hand, held at eye level, the camera capturing a wide, unobstructed view of the entire driveway. The audio was clean. The angle was unbroken. He recorded Stanton's commands. He recorded Ashford's calm, repeated identification of herself. He recorded the grab, the twist, the moment her face hit the pavement. He recorded Driscoll pinning her arm. He recorded Nolan standing still with her camera tilted toward the ground during the exact seconds the force was applied. And he recorded the moment Stanton pointed at a 14-year-old boy in pajamas and threatened to arrest him for standing in his grandmother's doorway. Osei's hands didn't shake. 30 years in the Marine Corps had trained that out of him a long time ago. Behind him, through the screen door, his wife Grace was already on the phone with 911. "There are federal agents assaulting our neighbor," she said, her voice tight but clear. "She's a federal judge. They have her on the ground in handcuffs. She's bleeding. There's a child in the house." The dispatcher paused. "Ma'am, did you say a federal judge?" Grace repeated it. "Yes. Judge Nadine Ashford, Southern District of Florida. She lives across the street. They're hurting her right now." The call was logged at 6:51 a.m., 9 minutes after the SUVs had arrived. Before hanging up, Grace gave the address, the number of agents, and a description of the vehicles. Then Osei made a second call. This one to a contact at the Broward County NAACP chapter, a man he'd known for 20 years. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke 5 sentences. They just put Judge Ashford on the ground in her driveway. "ICE agents. No warrant. I have video. Call everyone." Within minutes, that call became 2 calls, then 5, then 12. By the time Stanton walked back to his SUV, the chain had already reached Washington. He just didn't know it yet. They left her on the ground for 28 minutes. 28 minutes on hot Florida concrete in a white church dress, with her wrists cuffed behind her back and blood drying above her left eye. The sun had started to climb. The pavement was already warm and getting warmer. Ashford lay still, not because she had given up, but because she understood that any movement could be used against her. So she spoke instead. "My judicial credentials are in my purse. It's on the passenger seat. You can verify who I am right now." Stanton didn't check, didn't send anyone to look, didn't respond. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, waiting. Driscoll crouched near the SUV, running her name through federal databases. The process was slow. Not because the systems were slow, but because no one on that driveway was in any rush to admit a mistake. While they waited, Driscoll said something Osei's phone picked up with disturbing clarity. "Judges don't live in places like this, not ones that look like her." Nolan said nothing. Down the block, doors had started opening. A woman in scrubs stood at the end of her walkway. A man 2 houses down recorded from a second angle. Inside, Elijah stood at the living room window, tears running down his face, both hands pressed against the glass, watching his grandmother bleed on her own driveway. Then at 7:10 a.m., a junior agent in one of the SUVs ran the property address through a federal database. The result came back instantly. The home was deeded to the Honorable Nadine R. Ashford, United States District Judge. He radioed Stanton privately. Stanton's face shifted. Not guilt. Something closer to calculation. He walked back, unlocked the cuffs, and dropped her wrists without a word. No apology, no explanation, no incident report offered. They drove away like it was any other Sunday morning. For a long time, Ashford didn't move. She sat on her driveway with her legs folded beneath her, one hand pressed to the cut above her eye, the other flat on the concrete. Her dress was torn. Her palms were scraped raw. The cuffs had left red welts around both wrists that would darken into bruises by nightfall. Blood had dried along her jawline. The Bible on the passenger seat was still there. The car door was still open. She never made it to church. Colonel Osei crossed the street immediately, his wife Grace, a step behind with a towel and ice from their freezer. Grace knelt and pressed the towel gently to the wound. Neighbors moved toward the driveway slowly. Someone called paramedics. Ashford's hands were shaking. Her voice was not. She looked at Osei and said, "I need my phone." He retrieved it from the car. She made 4 calls in under 10 minutes. The first to Chief Judge Leonard Keene of the Southern District of Florida. She told him what happened in the same measured tone she used from the bench. He said one sentence, "I'm calling the administrative office now." The second to the United States Marshal's Service. She identified herself, gave her address, and described the incident. A deputy marshal was dispatched immediately. The third to her personal attorney. The fourth was the hardest. She called her daughter Simone and told her what Elijah had seen. Inside the house, Elijah sat on the hallway floor with his arms wrapped around his knees, still crying. He hadn't moved since Stanton pointed at him and said he was next. He was 14 years old. Within 45 minutes, a U.S. Marshal arrived. The Chief Judge had contacted the administrative office of the courts. The Inspector General's office had been flagged. The machinery of federal judicial protection had begun to move, and it was moving fast. Back at the Miami field office that afternoon, Stanton sat at his desk and typed his report. The language was careful. His unit had responded to a credible tip regarding a potentially undocumented individual at a residential address in Coral Springs. The subject was uncooperative and aggressive upon contact. Minimal force was used to gain compliance. The matter was resolved when the subject's identity was clarified on scene. No injuries were reported. He signed it and submitted it. Driscoll co-signed without changing a word. Nolan uploaded her department-issued camera footage to the secure server. The video showed the SUVs arriving. It showed agents exiting vehicles. Then it jumped. The 28 minutes in between were either missing or obscured by angles that captured pavement, boots, and nothing else. No takedown, no cuffs, no blood above the eye. No one, 4-year-old boy, standing in the doorway. No finger pointed at his face. Kellner reviewed the file that evening. He read the summary, scanned the footage timestamps, and initialed the report without a single follow-up question. No request for additional footage, no interview with the subject, no cross-reference of the address, just a signature and a closed file. None of them knew about Osei's video. None of them knew Grace had called 911 at 6:51 a.m. and identified the woman on the ground as a federal judge. None of them knew the U.S. Marshals had already been contacted. None of them knew that by the time Kellner initialed that report, the chief judge of the Southern District of Florida had already made calls that couldn't be undone. They filed their version of the story and went home thinking it was over. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, Osei's video had traveled further than any of them could have imagined. A copy sat with the U.S. Marshals Service, another with the DOJ Office of Inspector General, another with the Office of Professional Responsibility, another with the Congressional Black Caucus. Each copy carried the same unbroken footage, the same wide angle, the same clear audio, the same 28 minutes that Stanton's report had reduced to one sentence. A still frame was extracted and attached to an internal DOJ memorandum. It showed a black woman in a white dress face down on concrete, blood visible on her forehead, a federal agent positioned with his knee near her back. The memo was marked urgent. Chief Judge Leonard Keene did not wait for the system to move on its own. He personally called the Attorney General's office. The conversation was short. The DHS secretary was briefed the same day. A phrase appeared in one internal communication that would later be cited in congressional testimony. They arrested one of ours. That sentence changed the speed of everything. ICE leadership in Washington went into immediate damage control. Within hours, Stanton, Driscoll, and Nolan were placed on administrative leave. Their badges were collected. Their access to federal systems was suspended. Kellner was pulled from supervisory duties without public announcement. His pending performance review was frozen. No press release was issued. No public statement was made. But inside the Department of Homeland Security, the silence was louder than any headline, because they had seen the video. They had read the report Stanton filed, and they knew those two things told completely different stories. DOJ and OIG investigators arrived at the Miami field office within a week. They did not come to ask questions. They came to pull files. Every operation Stanton's unit had run over the past 4 years was extracted, cataloged, and reviewed. The pattern was immediate and damning. Of all stops classified under credible tips, 84% targeted Black and Latino residents in affluent neighborhoods. The tips themselves were often anonymous, unverified, and in several cases fabricated entirely by agents to justify patrol routes through wealthy zip codes where minorities lived. 12 prior incidents mirrored the Ashford arrest almost exactly. Residents detained in their own driveways or front yards, ordered to prove they lived in their own homes, questioned without warrants, held without cause. Not one of those 12 people was ever charged with a crime. Not one incident resulted in disciplinary action. Then investigators compared Nolan's department camera footage with Osei's recording frame by frame. The timestamps aligned. The angles did not. At 3 separate moments during the encounter, Nolan had adjusted her camera away from the action. Each adjustment coincided precisely with a moment of escalation. The grab, the takedown, the threat to Elijah. Investigators concluded the angle changes were deliberate and constituted evidence tampering, but the most damaging discovery came from internal emails. A chain between Stanton and Kellner spanning 2 years showed Kellner advising agents on language, how to frame reports, which words triggered OIG review flags and which ones didn't, how to describe force as compliant-assisted positioning, how to classify racial stops under community safety protocols. One email from Kellner read, "Keep it clean on paper and nobody looks twice." That email would be read aloud in a federal courtroom less than a year later. The Congressional Black Caucus held a press conference on a Tuesday morning in Washington. Behind the podium, a screen displayed a single still frame from Osei's video. A black woman in a white dress, face down on concrete, blood on her forehead, 2 agents above her. The image played on every major network within the hour. It was shared millions of times before sundown. Congressional hearings were announced the same week. Ashford was invited to testify. She declined. Instead, she issued a written statement that was read into the record and reprinted in full by every major outlet. "I do not seek attention. I seek accountability. What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day, except most of them are not federal judges, and most of them do not have a neighbor with a camera." The statement landed with the weight of a ruling from the bench. It was precise, it was measured, and it left no room for rebuttal. Advocacy groups filed FOIA requests targeting ICE field office operations across the Southeast. Op-eds flooded editorial pages. Legal analysts dissected the case on cable news. Civil rights organizations called for a full restructuring of ICE oversight protocols. And then the calls started coming. Former detainees who had encountered Stanton's unit began reaching out to attorneys. People who had been stopped in their own neighborhoods, questioned without cause, held without explanation, and released without apology. People who had filed complaints that went nowhere. People who had been told by the system that what happened to them didn't matter. Now they had a name attached to a pattern. Now they had video. And now, for the first time, someone was listening. The outcomes came fast. Agent Brock Stanton was terminated for excessive force, falsifying federal reports, civil rights violations, and conduct unbecoming a federal officer. His 7-year career ended with a single letter and a referral to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. His badge was collected, his credentials were revoked, his name was flagged in every federal employment database. Agent Luke Driscoll was terminated for excessive force, co-signing a falsified report and racially discriminatory language captured on Osei's recording. Judges don't live in places like this. Not ones that look like her. That sentence followed him out the door and into a federal referral of his own. Agent Tara Nolan was terminated for evidence tampering, failure to intervene during an unlawful use of force, and filing a misleading video record. The frame-by-frame comparison between her footage and Osei's left no room for the word accidental. She had watched a federal judge bleed on her own driveway and pointed her camera at the ground. Deputy Field Director Vance Kellner did not wait to be fired. He was given a choice and took the resignation, but it came with consequences: loss of pension, loss of federal retirement benefits, and a formal referral for investigation into years of supervisory negligence, obstruction, and coaching agents to falsify language in official reports. Keep it clean on paper, and nobody looks twice. That email alone would have ended him. 6 additional agents from Stanton's unit were placed under active investigation. 3 were suspended pending review. The Miami field office was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all field operations, real-time review of use of force incidents, and civilian auditing of agent complaint records. The hunting party was finished. Judge Ashford filed her lawsuit in the same federal courthouse where she sat on the bench. The suit named ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, Stanton, Driscoll, Nolan, and Kellner, each individually and in their official capacities. The claims were precise: unlawful arrest, excessive force, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress. and a separate claim filed on behalf of her grandson Elijah for psychological trauma suffered by a minor witness who watched his grandmother forced to the ground and was threatened with arrest in his own home. The government moved to settle quietly. The first offer came within weeks. Ashford rejected it. A second offer followed. She rejected that too. Her attorney made her position clear. This is not about a number. This is about a record. The case settled for $4.7 million, but the money was not what made the agreement historic. Attached to the settlement were mandated national reforms to ICE field operations, independent review of all warrantless stops, mandatory recording protocols using tamper-proof body cameras, a publicly accessible database of agent complaint histories, and required retraining on constitutional rights, racial bias, and use of force thresholds across every domestic field office. Separately, the criminal cases moved forward. Stanton and Driscoll were indicted on federal civil rights charges. Nolan entered a guilty plea to evidence tampering and received 14 months in federal custody. Driscoll was convicted and sentenced to 3 years. Stanton went to trial. He maintained he had acted on a credible tip and followed protocol. The jury watched Osei's video, read Stanton's report, and deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. 5 years in federal prison. The gavel satisfying a debt his badge never could. 6 months later, Judge Nadine Ashford walked into her courtroom in the Southern District of Florida. The gallery was full. When she appeared through the side door in her black robe, every person in the room stood. Not because the bailiff told them to, because they chose to. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Ashford said nothing about it. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and gavelled the room to order. The docket moved forward. She didn't reference the driveway. She didn't reference the blood, the cuffs, the 28 minutes. She didn't need to. Everyone in that courtroom already knew. Colonel Edwin Osei was honored by the NAACP at their annual gala for his role in documenting the arrest. He accepted the recognition in a dark suit, standing straight the way a man does after 30 years in the Marine Corps. He kept his remarks short. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I picked up my phone. That's all it takes. Elijah began seeing a therapist twice a week. The nightmares came less often now. With his grandmother's encouragement, he started a school project on civil rights and accountability. He presented it to his 8th grade class with a steadiness that surprised his teachers. In Washington, the Ashford case became required training material for every incoming DHS field agent. A framed quote from her written statement was mounted in 3 federal courthouses across the country. The law does not ask what you look like, it asks what you did. Back in Coral Springs, on a quiet Sunday morning, Ashford pulled into her driveway. She placed her Bible on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove to church. No SUVs on the street, no agents on her property, no commands, no hands, no knees. Just a woman in her own home, on her own time, unbothered, unbroken, and unquestioned. If this story moved you, don't just watch in silence. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to see what happens when power, racism, and accountability collide. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
What are you doing in here?
I'm shopping with my daughter.
We received a call about someone who doesn't belong.
I belong wherever I have business.
Got ID to back that
I'm
up? Funny. People like you always have a story.
Senior Chief Darnell Covington had been gone for 11 months. 11 months of encrypted communications, blacked out locations, and missions he would never be allowed to talk about. He was 42 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 18 years of Special Operations service, and he had spent more of his adult life overseas than in his own home. He had missed his daughter Zara's 8th birthday, her 10th, her 13th. He missed the recital where she played piano for the first time in front of an audience. He missed the parent-teacher night where her AP history teacher told an empty chair that Zara was one of the most gifted students she had ever taught. He missed all of it. Not because he didn't care, but because the work he did kept other families safe while his own waited. Zara was 17 now. A straight-A student, quiet, focused, The kind of kid who kept a calendar on her wall and crossed off the days until her father came home. Prom was in 2 weeks. Before his last deployment, Darnell had made her one promise. When I get back, I'm taking you to pick out your dress. Not your mom, not your aunt, me. She had laughed and said he didn't know anything about dresses. He told her he didn't need to, he just needed to be there. On a Thursday afternoon, Darnell walked through the front door in jeans, a clean hoodie, and sneakers. No uniform, no ceremony. Just a father standing in the hallway of his own house for the first time in almost a year. Zara came around the corner, froze, and then ran into him so hard she nearly knocked him back. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed without saying a word. He held her with both arms and closed his eyes. He didn't carry weapons that day. He didn't carry rank or reputation. He carried one thing only, a promise. Saturday, he told her quietly. We're going shopping. Saturday afternoon, Darnell and Zara pulled into the parking lot of Bellevue Elegance, an upscale dress boutique in a predominantly white suburb 20 minutes from their home. The building was clean, modern, with mannequins in the window draped in sequins and tulle. Zara grabbed his arm the moment they stepped out of the car, pulling him toward the entrance with the kind of excitement only a 17-year-old heading to prom could generate. Inside, the store was bright and expensive. Crystal lighting, soft music, racks of gowns organized by color and designer. White mothers and their daughters moved between displays, holding fabric up to the light, checking price tags, whispering opinions to each other. A few heads turned when Darnell and Zara walked through the door. The glances were brief but unmistakable. A woman in her 50s near the front display clutched her handbag slightly tighter as they passed. 2 sales associates near the register exchanged a look. A third, Megan Hollister, 28, walked over with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her gaze lingering a beat too long on Darnell before moving to Zara. "Just looking for a prom dress," Zara said, already scanning the nearest rack. Megan nodded but didn't offer to pull anything. She didn't suggest styles or sizes. She didn't guide them toward the fitting rooms the way she had with the family before them. She stepped back and watched. Darnell noticed everything. His training read the room the way it read any environment, automatically, without effort. The way the staff gravitated toward other customers and away from his daughter, the whispered words behind the counter, the body language that shifted when he made eye contact. He said nothing. He wasn't here to confront anyone or prove a point. He was here for Zara. She held up a lavender gown and grinned at him. "What about this one?" He smiled. "Try it on." "That's what we're here for." She disappeared into the fitting room, and Darnell sat in a velvet chair outside the curtain, hands folded, watching the store move around him with the quiet awareness of a man who had survived places far more dangerous than this. He had no idea that 3 aisles away, Megan Hollister was reaching for the phone behind the register. Megan Hollister waited until Darnell's attention was on the fitting room before she moved. She walked past the register, through the back hallway near the stockroom, and picked up the store phone mounted to the wall. She dialed the non-emergency police line and spoke in a low voice, cupping her hand around the receiver. She told the dispatcher there was a suspicious male in the store. She said he didn't look like he belonged, that he had been lingering near expensive merchandise, and that she was concerned for the safety of her customers. The dispatcher asked for a description. Megan gave one. Black male, tall, muscular build, wearing a hoodie. She didn't mention that he was with his teenage daughter. She didn't mention that he had spoken politely, touched nothing on the racks, and was sitting quietly in a chair waiting while his child tried on a prom dress. She described him the way she saw him, as a threat that didn't fit the room. The dispatcher confirmed a unit would be sent. Megan hung up and walked back to the sales floor, smoothing her blouse, adjusting her expression. She positioned herself near the front counter where she could watch without being questioned. 3 aisles away, Darnell sat in the same velvet chair, legs crossed at the ankle, hands resting in his lap. From behind the fitting room curtain, Zara's voice came through bright and excited. "Dad, how long should I twirl? Like, do I do a slow spin or a full dramatic one?" Darnell laughed softly. "Give me the full show." You only get one prom, she giggled. The curtain rustled. He could hear her adjusting the fabric, stepping into shoes, whispering to herself in the mirror. He leaned back in the chair and smiled. He had no idea that a patrol car was already pulling into the parking lot. The cruiser rolled to a stop near the boutique entrance at 2:47 p.m., 8 minutes after the call. Officer Victor Staines stepped out first. He was 44 years old, 16 years on the Bellevue Police Department, and built like a man who used his size as a first line of communication. His hand went to his belt before his feet hit the pavement. It was habit. The kind of habit that had generated 19 formal complaints over the course of his career. Racial profiling, excessive force, discriminatory stops, intimidation during routine encounters. Every single one had been reviewed by internal affairs. Every single one had been dismissed, downgraded, or filed without action. Supervisors described him in evaluations as effective and direct. Community members in Black and Latino neighborhoods had a different vocabulary. They called him a predator with a badge. They knew his car. They knew his face. They warned their children when they saw him coming. His partner, Officer Nina Shelby, 29, exited the passenger side and followed 2 steps behind. She had been on the force for 3 years and had been paired with Staines for the last 7 months. In that time, she had never once questioned his judgment, never once pushed back on a stop, never once filed a supplemental report noting a concern. She watched, she followed, she stayed quiet. That silence would cost her. Staines pushed through the glass door of Bellevue elegance with the confidence of a man who had never been held accountable for anything. His body camera was active, the red light blinking steadily on his chest. The store was calm, music playing, customers browsing, no disturbance, no raised voices, no visible threat of any kind. His eyes moved across the room and landed on Darnell Covington, seated in a velvet chair outside a fitting room, waiting for his daughter. Staines adjusted his belt and started walking toward him. Shelby followed without a word. Staines stopped 3 feet from the velvet chair. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask a question. He looked down at Darnell and said, "Stand up, hands where I can see them." Darnell looked up. His expression shifted from relaxed to alert in less than a second, the way it did when something in a room changed without warning. He kept his hands on the armrests, visible, open. "Is there a problem, officer? Stand up. Hands where I can see them." Louder this time, sharp enough to cut through the music and turn heads across the store. From behind the fitting room curtain, Zara's voice came through, smaller now. "Dad? What's going on? Everything's fine, baby. Stay inside." Darnell stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, his palms open at his sides. He was taller than Staines by 2 inches, which only made the officer step closer. "What are you doing in this store?" Staines asked. "Shopping with my daughter. She's trying on a prom dress." "Who are you with?" "I just told you. My daughter. She's right behind that curtain. You have receipts? We haven't bought anything yet. She's still trying things on." "Can you prove you're a customer?" Darnell's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I walked in through the front door with my 17-year-old daughter. We've been here for 20 minutes. Each question landed heavier than the last, not because they were difficult, but because they weren't real questions. They were accusations shaped like procedure. Staines wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for a reason. "You fit a description we were given," Staines said. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Darnell exhaled slowly through his nose. He reached toward his back pocket with his right hand, moving the way he always moved around law enforcement, slow, visible, non-threatening. Staines grabbed his wrist. His grip was hard and immediate. "Slow, real slow. I am going slow," Darnell said quietly, his eyes locked onto Staines. "I'm reaching for my wallet. That's all." Shelby stood 4 feet to the left, her hand resting on her radio, watching everything, saying nothing. The curtain moved. Zara pulled it open with one hand and stepped out barefoot onto the boutique floor, still wearing the lavender prom dress. The hem pooled slightly around her ankles. Her hair was pinned up the way she had been practicing for weeks. She looked like she was ready for the best night of her life. Then she saw her father. Darnell Covington, a man who had survived ambushes in 3 countries, who had carried wounded teammates through gunfire, who had spent 18 years doing the work most people would never know about, was standing with his wrist locked in the grip of a police officer inside a dress shop. Zara's face crumbled. The excitement drained out of her expression like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, but before she could speak, Staines turned his head toward her and barked, "Stay right there. Don't move." The words hit her like a shove. She flinched. Her eyes filled. Darnell's voice changed for the first time. The calm cracked, and underneath it was something harder, something a man only uses when his child is being spoken to in a way no child should be. "Don't talk to my daughter like that." Staines took it as aggression. He released Darnell's wrist only to grab his shoulder and spin him around with both hands. Darnell's chest hit the mirrored wall beside the fitting rooms. The glass cracked from the center outward in a spiderweb pattern. Staines forced him into a spread position, legs apart, palms flat against the fractured glass. Zara screamed. The sound cut through the entire store. A woman near the accessories wall gasped and pulled her daughter behind her. A man in his 30 seconds near the front display froze with a garment bag in his hand, mouth open. Shelby stood to the side, hand still on her radio, eyes moving between Staines and the growing number of witnesses. She did nothing. Behind the counter, Megan Hollister watched with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The entire store was frozen. And Darnell's face was pressed against broken glass while his daughter stood behind him in a prom dress, shaking. Staines didn't stop at the wall. He pulled Darnell back by the collar of his hoodie and forced him downward, first to his knees, then flat onto his stomach on the boutique floor. The polished tile was cold against Darnell's cheek. Staines drove his knee into the center of Darnell's back and pressed his weight down. Darnell did not resist. His hands were open, his body still, his breathing controlled. Every instinct he had trained into his muscles over 18 years of special operations screamed at him to move. He didn't. "I am not resisting," he said. His voice was steady but strained under the weight. "My daughter is watching. Please." Staines said nothing. He pulled Darnell's wrists together behind his back and snapped the handcuffs shut. The metallic click echoed through the silent store like a gunshot. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Zara broke. She let out a sob that came from somewhere deep, the kind of sound a child makes when the world stops making sense. She stood in the lavender prom dress, barefoot on the boutique floor, mascara running down both cheeks, her hands trembling at her sides. She watched her father, the man who had come home to keep a promise, lying face down in handcuffs 3 feet from the fitting room where she had been twirling for him 90 seconds earlier. A white woman near the front of the store pulled her own daughter closer and whispered something about staying out of it. She turned them both away from the scene. An older black woman near the accessories wall, mid-60s, stood perfectly still with her phone raised in front of her, recording. Her hand was steady. Her face was tight with fury. A white man in his 30s, wearing a faded Marines t-shirt, stepped forward from the shoe display. His voice was loud and clear. "He hasn't done anything. What are you doing?" Staines snapped his head toward him. "Step back. Now." Shelby spoke for the first time. "Sir, please give us space." But she didn't look at Staines. She didn't challenge the knee on Darnell's back. She didn't question the cuffs. She asked the witness to move, not the officer to stop. Staines searched him right there on the floor, in front of his daughter, in front of every customer in the store, in front of the cameras he didn't yet understand would destroy him. He rolled Darnell slightly to one side and began pulling items from his pockets, one at a time, placing them on the tile like evidence from a crime scene: a wallet, a cell phone, a set of car keys with a worn leather keychain, and a folded piece of paper, softened at the creases from being carried too long. Staines unfolded it without asking. The handwriting was a teenager's, slightly uneven, written in purple ink. It read, "Come home safe, Daddy. I'll save you a dance at prom." Staines glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. Then he dropped it on the floor beside Darnell's face. the way someone discards a receipt they don't need. Zara saw it fall. Her hand went to her mouth. She had written that note the night before his last deployment. She had slipped it into his jacket pocket while he was loading his bag. He had carried it for 11 months across 3 continents and never once let it out of his reach. Now it was on a boutique floor next to a knee and a pair of handcuffs. Staines opened the wallet. He found a driver's license, 2 credit cards, a debit card, and a military ID. He held the military ID up, studied it for a long moment, turned it over, then looked down at Darnell. He paused, and then he said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. Anybody can buy one of these online. You'd be surprised how many guys like you fake being military. He tossed the ID onto Darnell's back like it was nothing, like the man underneath it was nothing. The body camera on Staines's chest recorded every word. The older black woman's phone recorded every word. The ceiling cameras recorded every frame. 3 angles. Crystal audio. No ambiguity. And Darnell lay still on the cold tile, his daughter's note next to his face, his military ID on his back, and the weight of a man who had already decided what he was before he ever walked through the door. Franklin Beaumont pushed through the front door of his own store at 4 p.m., carrying a takeout bag and a coffee. He was 67 years old, white-haired, tall, and had owned Bellevue Elegance for 31 years. He knew every display case, every camera angle, every square foot of the building. He stopped 3 steps inside the door, the takeout bag lowered to his side, the coffee stayed frozen in his other hand. A black man was lying face down on his floor in handcuffs. A teenage girl in a lavender prom dress stood nearby, sobbing. 2 police officers stood over them. A dozen customers were pressed against the walls, some recording with their phones, others clutching their children. No one was shopping. No one was speaking. The store smelled like perfume and fear. Franklin set everything down on the nearest display table and walked straight toward Staines. His voice was low and controlled, but carried the kind of authority that comes from owning the room you're standing in. "What is happening in my store?" Staines straightened. "Sir, we responded to a call about a suspicious individual. We're handling it." Franklin turned to Megan. She was still standing behind the register, arms at her sides now, face pale. "Did you call them?" Megan opened her mouth. He was, I thought." Franklin's face went white. Not with fear, with anger. He turned back to Staines. "This man is a customer. He's here with his daughter. She's trying on a prom dress. You have him in handcuffs on my floor. My store has cameras on every wall, and I am looking at what appears to be an assault. Uncuff him, now." Staines shifted his weight. "Sir, we're conducting an investigation." Franklin stepped closer. His voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "You're conducting a disgrace. Uncuff him now, or I'm calling the chief of police myself. I've known him for 20 years. We golf on Sundays. And when he sees what's on my cameras, you're going to wish you'd listen to me in the next 5 seconds." Staines didn't move. The room watched, every phone still recording, every witness still frozen. The only sound was Zara crying. Staines reached down and unlocked the cuffs. He did it slowly, deliberately, as if speed would mean admission. The metal came off the left wrist first, then the right. Darnell didn't move immediately. He stayed on the floor for a full breath, collecting himself the way he had been trained to after every controlled situation. Then he pressed his palms flat against the tile and pushed himself up. He rose to his feet slowly. His wrists were red and swollen. His hoodie was scuffed at the shoulder and dusted with grit from the floor. His face had a faint mark from the tile pressed into his cheek. His dignity had been pulled apart in front of his daughter, in front of strangers, in front of cameras. He stood anyway. Zara ran into him before he could turn around. She hit his chest, still wearing the lavender dress, barefoot, her face swollen and streaked with mascara. She grabbed fistfuls of his hoodie and pressed her forehead into him and didn't let go. He wrapped both arms around her and held her the way he had held her the day he came home. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Franklin turned to Megan. His voice was flat and final. "Get your things. You're done." She blinked. "Mr. Beaumont, I was just trying to. You called the police on a father shopping with his daughter. In my store. Get your things. Get out. Don't come back. Megan's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the room for support and found none. She walked to the back without another word. Franklin turned toward Staines, who was already moving toward the front door with Shelby a step behind. Franklin stepped into his path. You're not going anywhere until this is documented. I have your badge number, your face on 6 cameras, and a store full of people who watched every second of what you just did. Staines looked at him for a long moment, jaw clenched, then pushed past him and walked through the door. Shelby followed without looking back. Franklin didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The footage existed. The witnesses existed. The damage was already done and already recorded. He turned back to Darnell, who was sitting in the velvet chair again, Zara curled against his side, the cracked mirror behind them reflecting a father holding his daughter in a dress she hadn't even gotten to show him yet. Darnell made one phone call. He sat in Franklin Beaumont's back office with Zara beside him, a bag of ice pressed to his wrist, and dialed the command duty officer at Naval Special Warfare Command. He spoke for less than 4 minutes. He identified himself by rank and unit. He described the stop, the force, the cuffs, the language. He stated that it had been captured on body camera and by multiple civilian witnesses. Then he hung up and waited. He didn't need to do anything else. The machine did the rest. Within the hour, NCIS was notified. A case file was opened and assigned to a special agent out of the regional field office. Within 2 hours, the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel received a briefing. A senior military attorney flagged the incident as a potential civil rights violation involving an active-duty Special Operations service member in a civilian setting. Within 3 hours, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division had the case on its desk. A federal liaison placed a call to the Bellevue Police Department requesting preservation of all body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and officer reports related to the encounter. Franklin Beaumont didn't wait to be asked. He contacted his security company that same evening and had every second of boutique footage backed up to an external server and a hard drive locked in his office safe. He provided a full written statement before midnight. The older black woman who had recorded the encounter from the accessories wall was Vivian Osei. She was 61 years old, a retired school teacher, grandmother of 4. She uploaded her video to 3 platforms that night. By midnight, it had crossed 500,000 views. By morning, it was over 1 million. The veteran who had spoken up, Colton Briggs, 34, a former Marine, posted his own account online. He described what he had witnessed in plain, direct language. He named the department. He described the officers. He described a man being slammed into a mirror and cuffed on the floor while his daughter stood in a prom dress and watched. It went viral within hours. The internet identified Staines before the sun came up. His name, his badge photo, his department, his complaint history surfaced by noon. 19 formal allegations. 0 discipline. Local news picked it up Monday morning. By Monday night, it was national. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation by Tuesday. Officers Victor Staines and Nina Shelby were placed on unpaid suspension effective immediately. Their firearms were collected. Their credentials were deactivated. Their access to department systems was revoked. The body camera footage was pulled first. The file was 22 minutes long, beginning from the moment Staines activated the camera in the parking lot and ending after he and Shelby exited the boutique. Investigators watched it in a closed room with the department's legal counsel present. No one spoke during the playback. The footage confirmed every detail, Staines approaching without cause. The commands issued before any question was asked. The wrist grab, the shove into the mirrored wall, the knee in Darnell's back, the handcuffs on a man who never once raised his voice or moved his hands. The search conducted on the floor of a dress boutique. The note from a 17-year-old girl unfolded, read, and dropped on the tile. The military ID examined and tossed onto a man's back with the words, "Anybody can buy one of these online. You'd be surprised how many guys like you fake being military." The footage captured it all because Staines himself had turned the camera on. NCIS agents arrived at the Bellevue Police Department on Wednesday. 2 federal civil rights investigators followed on Thursday. They requested every complaint ever filed against Staines, every internal review, every disposition letter, every supervisor's note. What they found was a pattern the department had chosen to ignore for over a decade. Staines' 19 prior complaints were formally reopened. 8 former victims came forward publicly within the first week, each describing encounters that followed the same script: baseless stops, aggressive searches, racial language, targets who were always black men in affluent areas doing ordinary things, shopping, walking, driving, sitting in parked cars, living in neighborhoods Staines had decided they didn't belong in. The police chief held a press conference on Friday. He stood at a podium with the department seal behind him and called the incident deeply troubling. He promised a full and transparent investigation. He expressed confidence in the process. He did not apologize, not to Darnell, not to Zara, not to the 8 other victims now standing in front of cameras telling stories the department had buried for years. The community wasn't satisfied. They had heard deeply troubling before. They had watched transparent investigations disappear into filing cabinets. This time, they had footage. This time, they had federal attention. And this time, they were not going to let it go. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed federal charges 6 weeks after the incident. The indictment was direct and specific. Officer Victor Staines was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, assault under color of authority, and filing a false official report. The false report charge stemmed from the account Staines had submitted after the encounter, in which he described Darnell as confrontational and physically resistive. The body camera footage showed neither. Every word of his report was a lie written by a man who assumed no one would ever check. Officer Nina Shelby was formally cited for failure to intervene. She had stood within arm's reach while a compliant man was slammed into a wall, forced to the ground, and searched without cause in front of his minor daughter. She had watched. She had said nothing to stop it. Under federal standards, her silence made her complicit. The Bellevue Police Department entered a federal consent decree. The terms were non-negotiable. Independent oversight of all use of force incidents. Mandatory bias training with annual recertification. A complete restructuring of the internal complaint review process, which federal investigators described in court filings as functionally designed to protect officers rather than serve the public. Staines' trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution called 14 witnesses. They presented the body camera footage on the first day. The courtroom was silent as the jury watched from Staines' own perspective. A father approached without cause. Commands barked before a single question was asked. A wrist grabbed. A body slammed into a mirror hard enough to crack it. A man forced to the ground. A knee pressed into his back. A teenage girl in a lavender prom dress standing barefoot 3 feet away, screaming. They watched Staines unfold a handwritten note and drop it on the floor without a word. They watched him examine a military ID and toss it onto the back of a man who had served his country for 18 years. They heard him say, "Guys like you, fake being military." The defense argued Staines had responded to a legitimate call and followed established procedure. The prosecution dismantled that argument with the footage itself, with the 19 prior complaints, with the 8 other victims who took the stand and described the same officer doing the same thing to them in different locations across the same city. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge reviewed the sentencing guidelines, noted the pattern of prior conduct, the involvement of a minor witness, and the abuse of public authority. He sentenced Staines to 5 years in federal prison. The maximum allowed. Staines showed no reaction. He was removed from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same kind he had used on Darnell Covington on the floor of a dress boutique while a 17-year-old girl watched her world crack open. The civil lawsuit was filed within days of the criminal verdict. Darnell's attorneys named every party responsible: Victor Staines, personally; Nina Shelby, personally; the Bellevue Police Department, the city of Bellevue. The complaint ran 47 pages. It cited excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention, assault under color of authority, emotional harm to a minor, and systemic failure to address known patterns of discrimination by a department that had received 19 complaints about one officer over 16 years and had done nothing about any of them. Discovery exposed the full depth of the failure. Internal emails showed supervisors acknowledging Staines's pattern of aggressive stops targeting minorities in affluent commercial areas. One email from a lieutenant to the division commander read, "Staines is generating noise again." Another complaint from a shop owner on Meridian. Same profile as the others. Recommend we talk to him informally. The informal talk never happened. The complaint was filed and forgotten. Another victim. Another folder. Another year. The city's attorneys reviewed the body camera footage, the witness statements, the federal conviction, and the internal records. They knew what a jury would do with that material. They settled before trial. The amount was $2.4 million, but the money was only part of it. The settlement mandated structural reform, a civilian oversight board with full subpoena power and independent investigative authority, quarterly demographic reporting on all stops, detentions, and use of force incidents published publicly, a zero-tolerance policy for supervisors who failed to act on misconduct complaints, and a public database of officer disciplinary records accessible to any resident of the city. Shelby's law enforcement certification was suspended indefinitely following the consent decree. She never returned to policing. She never applied to another department. Her silence in that boutique followed her out of the profession entirely. Two supervisors who had reviewed and dismissed prior complaints against Staines were formally demoted. One was reassigned to an administrative role with no enforcement authority. The other took early retirement before the demotion took effect. The police chief, who had stood at a podium and called the incident deeply troubling without offering an apology, resigned under mounting pressure from the city council, the community, and the federal oversight team. His resignation letter was 3 sentences long. It mentioned nothing about Darnell Covington, nothing about Zara, nothing about a cracked mirror or a note on the floor. He left the way the department had operated for years, quietly, without accountability. Until now. 2 months later, Zara stood in front of a full-length mirror inside Bellevue Elegance. The store was quiet. It was after hours. Franklin Beaumont had opened it just for them. The dress was emerald green this time, not lavender. She never touched the lavender one again. Franklin had helped her choose it himself, pulling options from the back, holding fabrics up to the light, asking her what made her feel like herself. He didn't charge a cent. He told her the dress was on the house and that if she argued with him about it, he'd add shoes and a matching clutch, she argued. He added them. Darnell stood behind her in full navy dress whites. Every ribbon on his chest was in place, every crease pressed sharp. The uniform fit the way it always had, like it belonged on him, because it did. No one had ever questioned that before the floor of this store, and no one ever would again. Zara looked at herself in the mirror, then turned and looked at her father. "You really came home for this." "I promised," he said. His voice was quiet, his eyes were not. Franklin watched from the doorway with his arms folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Vivian Osei sent a card that arrived the morning of prom. It was handwritten. It said, "You are the kind of young woman this world needs more of. Shine tonight." Colton Briggs sent flowers. A simple arrangement with a note that read, "From one service family to another. Semper Fi." That evening, a family friend took a photo on the front porch. Zara in emerald green. Darnell in dress whites. Her hand on his arm, his chin high. Both of them looking directly into the camera. The photo was posted online that night. It reached 2 million shares in a week. No caption was needed. The image said everything. A father who came home. A daughter who waited. A promise that held. Back in Bellevue, a training bulletin circulated through the police department the following Monday. It showed a still frame from a body camera. A teenage girl in a lavender dress, barefoot, crying, reaching for her father on the floor of a dress boutique. Under the image were 6 words. "This is what failure looks like." No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone.